suppose some of you have read the book that I read. So I thought perhaps I should give you a background, the things that I did not include in the book. Perhaps that would be a good way to start. I have critics that they have criticized me for not including the cultural milieu in which this thing took place. And I didn't do that because I was not sure where to place it. The person with whom I work is a Yaqui Indian. Yaquis live in northwestern Mexico. They are a very peculiar group of people. There are 90,000 of them today. And they have lived where they are today since before the Spaniards came to the New World. I think it was around 1718 that they voluntarily, no, 1680, around 1680, they voluntarily allowed the missionaries to come to Sonora and voluntarily underwent missionization. And they kept the Spanish missionaries for 80 years. And then one day, they burned the churches and killed them off. And ever since that time, they have been on their own, which made them very strange. And they make a very strange concoction of the Catholicism of the time, 1600s, and whatever was ancestral to them. And today it's nearly an impossibility to untangle that, to disentangle that syncretic process, or that syncretic result. But at any rate, they involved themselves after the missionaries were expelled in a very, what would be the word? Let's say a total war against the Western man. And they have had 100 years, for instance, solid warfare. After Mexico gained its independence, they inherited the Yaqui problem. And they coped with it finally around the turn of the century by moving, you see, in full force, the Mexican forces, and taking the total Yaqui population and putting them in trains and boats and shipping them outside of Sonora. They shipped to southern Mexico, to the states of Yucatan, Oaxaca, and Veracruz. Don Juan was very young at that time. Don Juan is the man I worked for, the shaman I worked for. He was very young at that time, as a child, and he was caught in this mishmash, and he and his father were shipped to Veracruz, and then later he moved to Oaxaca. So it's very, I feel today that if I want to place this shamanistic tradition and the cultural milieu, I would have to make a sort of I would have to mix whatever it's Yaqui and something in central Mexico. Don Juan learned his tradition, or what I would call his tradition. He learned his knowledge of sorcery in Oaxaca. Therefore, he goes every year to Oaxaca in order to collect some hallucinogenic mushrooms that are very important in elucidating his knowledge. Those mushrooms do not grow in Sonora. They grow exclusively in Oaxaca. And the whole tradition of mushrooms, the mushroom cult, comes from that area. He uses also the cactus, Lophophora williams, peyote, commonly known peyote, which grows in the northern part of Mexico. And it's my belief that Don Juan has made again, like taking perhaps a Yaqui format or syncretism, since the Yaqui is Yaquis already had made this incredible process, amalgamating Catholicism, whatever was ancestral to them. Perhaps there's a facility for them at that level to take from different areas and make a conglomerate. And perhaps this knowledge it could be classified as belonging in essence to the Yaqui. It's the Yaqui spirit. The Yaquis, like I was saying, and perhaps I should continue this, they are warriors. And at the turn of the century, they were defeated by the Mexican forces in actual battles. And after they lost the battles, then they were disintegrated as a nation. They stayed in central Mexico for 40 years. And then after the war, Mexico is sort of a herald of democracy among us, the Latin nations. And what was very critical at the time after the war was what had happened in Europe. Hitler moving population, you see, displacing them. And then all of a sudden the Mexicans realized that they had done the same thing with the Yaquis. So they brought them back again to Sonora. They round them up again back to this reservation, sort of. It's a large area that they constructed as a reservation. And they have maintained, you see, the original land. The Mexican government allowed them to come back again to the core of the ancestral land. It is composed of 8 towns. And they have, but by the time you see the Yaquis were gone 40 years, the Mexicans have encroached on the land. They have subdivided it. It was open for colonization or something like that. And now that you have the problem, you see, of Mexican populations living next to Yaqui population, but they do not mix. And the Yaquis are very, they say, famous for the sense of aloofness. It's very hard to get to them, very hard to know them, very hard to work with them. It's especially hard for me, because although I come from Latin America, I look like a Mexican to them. I'm a Mexican. And they call them Yoris. It's a very despective term. It's a terrible word. And it's very difficult for me to get. It will be easier for an American anthropologist, for an Anglo-Saxon perhaps to come to the Yaqui land than it is for me. For me, it's nearly an impossibility. And the only way that I have halfway entered into it is through the auspices of the One and the Son. And they halfway tolerate me. They don't know what I'm doing anyways. They have this weird conception that I may be a spy from an American mining company. And the funny thing is that mining company has been trying to get into Sonora to exploit the copper ores, some of the Yaqui mountains, since 1947, the time the Yaquis came back. And the strange story is that there's no mining company that ever tried to exploit the ores. It's just an illusion of the Yaqui mine. But anyway, I'm the spy of that imaginary company. So they tolerate me some way, by now I think I don't bother them too much, but it's terribly hard to get to know the Yaquis, and I think it's the result, the reason for it is their endemic warfare against the Western man. But that's the Yaqui spirit. They are truly warriors. Not soldiers, because they are not disciplined in that sense. It's another concept. And what I have been trying to do with the book that I published and the whole work that I've done is trying to get into the cognitive system. First of all, the one, because that was the person I worked with. And see if by doing that, I would have been able to determine, let's say, a cognitive map for what is the Yaqui spirit. Whatever the one talks about as a spirit, a warrior spirit. But I did not have that aim in mind when I went to do my field work. This is a post facto. Upon reconsidering, finishing my field work, sitting on my desk, I have reconsidered the whole process, and I have said, this is a very good thing if I would try to look for a cognitive map. It's a totally a post facto rationale. Feel is something else. I went to, my interest in the one is it was a fortuitous affair. I was interested in collecting medicinal plants when I was an undergraduate. I was an undergraduate student, and I conceived that the way to move in the ladder, of scholarship, to publish, of course. And I felt that the easiest way to get something published would be to collect medicinal plants. Very clever, eh? And well, all you got to do is record the name, procure your dry specimen, have it identified in the botanical garden, and write whatever they say about it. I thought I was a very clever young man. And that was my interest. But I didn't know any Indians. Second problem. I knew a guy who knew Indians though, which in my mind was good. I was unsophisticated. So I had a friend, very good friend of mine, who lived in Arizona at that time. And he claimed, that he knew a great deal about Indians and plants. So I went, I paid a visit one summer, and I stayed with him for a long time. And I collected 80 of his plants in his description. And he says, you could check this with any Indian around here. And they tell you, whatever I'm telling you is this, that's what they do. And then he said to me at that time, there is, however, one old fogey crony that lives down there one day that knows a great deal about yachting. Perhaps you will talk to him. Maybe you won't look much. So we drove around in the opposite direction. Then misled us deliberately. And we wound up in some field in no man's land. And by the time it was about time to go home for me, so I gave it up, I was nonsense to look for this old fogey and I knew a great deal about the other. And so I was about to take the bus to go home when this old man walked into the Greyhound Depot. And this friend of mine says, that's the old man. And he went and talked to him. This friend of mine had this, and me, we have this strange relation. He pretends to speak Spanish. Esas glossolalia, he just talks in tongues. And then over a period of years, at first it was a joke. I tag along, telling, answering him in Spanish, and he was just, giving me this Jackson was talking in tongues to me, pretending that was Spanish, so somebody else could hear it and think that he speaks Spanish. So at first it was a joke, but then he believed that he speaks Spanish. He got to really believe that. And he's embarrassed me to no end of that. Sometimes he hits me, with people are, important people perhaps that I don't want to fool around with, and he speaks to me in Spanish. Horrendous. And that day he hit me with that. That was his speech. He went and talked to this old man in Spanish. And the old guy laughed, I was listening there, and it was pretty funny what he said. Preposterous, he was making up words. And then he left me. He talked to the old Indian in Spanish, and he turned around and left. And there I was standing with this old man. And he was laughing and it was very funny. I liked it. I noticed I got a nice sense of humor. And then I made my pitch, my anthropologist pitch at that point. I decided that perhaps that was the man I could turn into a key informant. But how do you proceed? See, I was inexperienced. So I decided that the only way to do would be to sell myself to him and tell him that I knew a great deal about peyote. And I told that, because listen, I know all there is to know about peyote. Perhaps it'll be convenient for you, it'll be advantageous to you if you talk to me. And the guy just looked at me. He just looked at me and laughed. But there was something very peculiar about the way he looked. That was quite exciting, I thought. Because I'm a little persistent, perhaps because I'm short. You either crash or you learn very funny mechanics, you see. So I'm very persistent, and I'm not dissuaded too easily. You have to cover me on the head to dissuade me. But this guy stopped me by looking at me. That was weird. No, there was something wrong there. I mean, I felt I recorded my body recorded something wrong. Very weird. Yeah, I'm not given to, I'm not a mystic man, see, at all. I'm very pragmatic. I proceed in specific ways. I'm not scared that easily. But how could this guy stop me just looking? That was something strange. And then he said, yes, perhaps you could come and see me sometime, and maybe we could talk in my house. And then again, this time he says, oh, there's my bus. He just got out. There's no bus out there. He just said that to me. I think he cut me off. So I came back to see him because he interested me. Personally. It was an interest, a personalistic interest. And I came back and 6 months later, I came back and looked him up, and he had moved from Arizona to Sonora. And I found him, and we got to talk, and he was very amenable man. There's some very peculiar sensation of control about him that I noticed at that time. It's very nice to be around Don Juan. I don't know what it is, but he makes me feel complete, very nice, concise. There's no loose ends. There's no fretting, no excitation, unnecessary excitation. Yet he's capable of exerting himself dramatically to a fantastic point, which is the opposite of what I find in my time. For what I am, I fret. I've been described by a friend of mine as being as nervous as the cockroach. Perhaps he's right. You see, I'm very nervous, and yet there's no conciseness about me. Perhaps that's the reason why I like Don Juan. I like his touch. And I came to see him over and over for a period of a year. And I had developed in this year this sing-song, this slogan. Every time I saw him, I said, when are you going to teach me about peyote? And he would laugh and discard my question. Until one day he took me up. And that was the beginning of this strange thing that was this apprenticeship. Apprenticeship to his knowledge, or I became an apprentice, not quite of his apprentice, I feel, but it's an apprenticeship to a system, to a way of being. And after 4 years, I withdrew from it because it became threatening. Too anguishing. And as perhaps ones who have read the book that I read, Don Juan used 3 hallucinogenic plants in order to teach his knowledge. Now, he used the cactus, Rocafora Williamson is called peyote, Jimson weed, this is one of the tula plants, and those hallucinogenic mushrooms. One of the species one of 14 species of hallucinogenic mushrooms that grow in central Mexico and belong to the genus Psilocybin. Now, the reason for my withdrawal, as I see it today, was very simple. We have a picture of the world that has been given to us through processes of socialization. And then we have a preconception already ingrained in us of what the world is like. And we call that reality. The reality of everyday life. It's the world taken for granted, that we assume it's there. And what's more, we assume that we could give ourselves consensus on the elements of our world from now to the day we die. And I don't like, for instance, taking this to an extreme. I don't need anybody anymore to be a person, a social entity. I could be all by myself. And I have myself in the idea of the group. You're absent. I'm all by myself in the universe, in the world. All I need is the idea of you. And that serves as that allegedly makes a group. Meaning, I could give myself consensus because I have already learned all the consensus that came from you, the group, at one time in my processes of socialization, my growing up. And at this time I'm an adult. I assume that I need nobody else to tell me what is real. So the force of the world taken for granted is tremendous. We never doubt that. However, under very precarious times sometimes, perhaps circumstances, very precarious circumstances, we get to doubt. And that is a blast. And what happened to me was precisely that. Don Juan had to steer me. He had guided me to this edge. And then I think he pushed me. And I went all the way. And I began to doubt. I began to, let's say, to lose the certainty that the world of everyday life is something I could account for.